Both of our speakers today are leaders within the co-sponsor of our program today, Revolutionary Westchester 250. Westchester County's nonprofit, which is working to encourage and amplify commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution in Westchester. Char Weigel is the Vice President of Special Projects for Rev 250. In addition, she's on the board of Odell House Rochambeau headquarters. She presents regularly and is the author of numerous articles on Westchester County history, including an upcoming one on the topic of her talk today, to be published in the fall edition of the Westchester Historian. Marc Cheshire serves as Vice President of Rev 250, serves on the board of Odell House Rochambeau headquarters, and is the village historian for Croton on Hudson, and is on the board of the Westchester County Historical Society. I turn the program over to Char.
Hello, everybody. Just gonna pull up my PowerPoint while I thank the Irvington Historical Society for the invitation for Marc and I to be here today. We're both big fans, and I'm actually a member of the Irvington Historical Society. So it's really great for the opportunity to share this new information with you. And if any of you have been on my walking tours or to some of my presentations, you won't be surprised to hear me say, if you are a veteran, I am going to dedicate this presentation to you because we are talking today about the original veterans of our country, and one in particular to whom I would like to return credit and honor for a job well done. The discovery of Benedict Arnold's treason was gobsmacking at the time and remains one of the most noted events in the Revolutionary War. General Henry Knox, seen here, expressed his shock by simply saying, "The strangest thing in the world has happened. Arnold has gone to the enemy." It took the very wordy Hamilton several pages to get out that same sentiment of surprise, but there was no denying that this was an earth-shattering event at the time. And it remains one of the most important and significant events of the Revolutionary War. So not surprising that it would spawn legends and lore. And I hope that between Marc and me today, we can correct some of those myths and show you where they came from and present you with new primary source evidence on the true story of the firing on the British ship of war, the Vulture, which stranded John Andre and ultimately resulted in the discovery of Arnold's treason. But to be fair, myths about the Vulture are by no means the only folklore persisting from the Revolutionary period. I don't know how many of you learned about George Washington the way that I did as a child, by hearing he could not tell a lie. Parson Weems first published this fable in his book, The Life of George Washington. And actually, it was in the 5th edition. So he was adding content, probably hoping to have people buy another copy. It's only not true, but Washington told many lies, often hoping that spies would feed them back to the British. Another myth, closer to home for us, is that the 3 militiamen who captured John Andre in Tarrytown, John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart, were actually highway robbers. If you saw the AMC TV series Turn, Washington Spies, you saw a beautifully produced piece of fiction that promulgated this myth. I have here one image from a scene in Turn. This one is where they are, in essence, mugging Andre. And the image on the left is a historical painting also depicting the captors in a less than favorable light. The fact is that they were militia on assignment, not robbers. But the bottom line is that someone made up something about the capture that historians are still chasing to correct with fact-based primary sources. That someone, in this case, was actually Benjamin Talmadge, and we can talk about what he did and why in the Q&A if you're interested. But today's focus is to bust several myths and return honor to a veteran, giving credit to a man whose image, I cannot even find. A man who persevered against the treachery of his commanding officer to thwart the plans of both Benedict Arnold and the British. And that man is American Colonel James Livingston. But first, a speed walk through some context to be sure that we have a common understanding of Arnold's treason and Andre's capture. Then we can dive into the final 7 days leading to the exposure of Arnold's treason. The true magnitude of Arnold's treason can really only be understood by first appreciating what a hero he was at the time. Washington and so many others, including Lamb and Knox, valued Arnold for his leadership early in the war, the successful taking of Ticonderoga with Ethan Allen, the attack on Quebec, where when Montgomery fell, Arnold assumed leadership of the Americans, and Arnold's stand against the British Navy on Lake Champlain, when Arnold and his men had to first build the ships that they would then use to fight the British in what has become known as the Battle of Valcour Island. But it was Saratoga that was the zenith of Arnold's career. Arnold led the attack that broke the British and Hessian lines and forced Burgoyne's surrender. This gave Ben Franklin what he needed over in Paris to convince the French that we were worth their investment. Without Arnold, we would not have had the men, the munitions, the money, the Navy from the French to win the war. But Arnold was gravely injured, physically by a musket ball to his leg, and emotionally by not receiving sufficient public recognition for his role. These factors and more combined to Arnold turning. He was appointed commandant of Philadelphia after the British withdrew from the city because his leg injury prevented him from a field command. In Philadelphia, he was court-martialed. Acquitted of all but 2 charges, he bitterly resented the accusations. And while the court-martial was going on, he began his outreach to the British. The secret correspondence went on for over a year through trusted couriers. The letters were in code under false names, often interlined with invisible ink. And his interlocutor was this guy. At least if you watched the AMC series Turn Washington Spy that I mentioned before. This is the actor, J.J. Feld, who portrayed Major John Andre. And here is an image of Andre from a more reliable source, himself. I thought that the symmetry of these 2 poses was interesting. Andre would eventually end up on this ship. Well, the ship that this homemade model that you can buy on Ruby Lane represents, the British sloop of war, the Vulture, before his final contact with Benedict Arnold. Just after midnight on September 22nd, 1780, John Andre, under the name John Anderson, met with Arnold in Haverstraw. The tenant farmers who had brought Andre and Anderson from the Vulture, Andre/Anderson from the Vulture, refused to row him back. So Andre and Arnold ended up going to a house in Haverstraw to allow the men to rest up. At dawn, the following morning, Colonel James Livingston ordered a cannonade on the Vulture, forcing her downriver. As a result, Arnold convinced Andre to go overland through the so-called neutral ground of Westchester and to change into Smith's civilian clothes. Arnold gave Andre papers to guide the attack on West Point, which he famously stuffed in his boots. These papers, along with Arnold's verbal instructions, were detailed plans of where Arnold had weakened the fort, where men were stationed, and were designed to allow the combined forces of the British commanding general Sir Henry Clinton and Naval Admiral Rodney to start an immediate and secret attack to take West Point and thereby take control of the Hudson. I have a paper published in the New York Archives magazine that gives new research on the double agents that Arnold was also exposing in these papers, and we'll talk a little bit about their role in tonight's topic as well. The next morning was September 23rd. Andre was captured traveling through Tarrytown by 3 honest militiamen. He eventually revealed his true identity, was tried in a military tribunal at Japan, found to be guilty of being a spy, and was executed. Arnold got away. But the British did not get West Point and the Hudson, which could likely have turned the course of the war. Many myths have traveled through secondary sources that Marc will speak about in a moment that claim that other individuals were the true unsung heroes of the capture. These claims variously involve men who alerted an unsuspecting and unknowing Livingston to the presence of the Vulture, who borrowed a cannon and fired on the Vulture, who scared Andre back when he was trying to land on the east side of the river, or scared him away while he sulked along the Albany Post Road. And there are other variants as well. But today, let's look at the actual historic record of why the Vulture was stranded and why Andre was eventually captured. And here's the area that I'm going to be talking about today. The last 7 days of Arnold's treason played out over the area from Spoyton Duyvil at the edge of British-controlled New York City up to the Hudson Highlands near West Point. Focusing in a little bit, we're specifically going to be taking a look at the main action from Haverstraw Bay here and Teller's Point, called Teller's Point at the time. Today we call it Croton Point Park, to Verplank and Stony Point, the critical Kings Ferry crossing up to West Point, and the home of Beverly Robinson that was serving as Arnold's headquarters. These last 7 days are a race between two men, Benedict Arnold and Colonel James Livingston. Arnold knew they were in a race. Livingston had no idea that his commanding officer was trying to sabotage him. Arnold was desperate to deliver the attack plans on West Point to either Beverly Robinson or John Andre, and to lock in his reward from the British. Livingston was just doing his job, guarding the crucial Kings Ferry crossing. So I want to start our countdown on Saturday, September 16th, 1780. The logs of the captain and master of the Vulture show that she sails north from Spoyton Duyvil, again, the port that was at the very edge of the British-controlled territory of New York City. But before she leaves, Captain Andrew Sutherland takes on an important passenger, Beverly Robinson. Beverly Robinson is the brother-in-law of Frederick Phillips III, Lord of Phillipsburg Manor. Robinson has accumulated great wealth and property through his marriage to Philip's sister, Susanna. A decade before this, Robinson was a close friend and colleague of George Washington during the French and Indian War. He acted in a way as Washington's wingman when Washington briefly courted another Philip's sister, Mary, in 1756. But now Robinson is colonel of the Loyal American Regiment, comprised of colonists who, like Robinson himself, had chosen to fight for the crown. Robinson's large estate near Garrison has been seized by the New York State government and is being used as headquarters for the commandant of West Point. On this map, you can see the Robinson house with the red arrow and West Point with the blue. Every day, Benedict Arnold is rowed across to West Point by his bargemen. An interesting note about the importance of primary sources here, the Google map inset that you see shows the fuchsia reddish arrow pointing to where the Pomeroy sign is today that claims to be the site of the Robinson house. The yellow arrow, though, points to where the house would have been given historical maps. So just to note that Pomeroy signs and plaques, like any secondary source, are not always accurate sources of history. It's not clear whether the Vulture arrived in Haverstraw Bay the night of the 16th or very early on the 17th, but it is clear from several primary sources that Livingston was alerted to her presence early on Sunday the 17th. And this is an important point, given that some of the myths about unsung heroes claim that they had to raise an alarm to alert an unknowing Livingston to the ship's presence. So how do we know that Livingston knew? Well, many reasons. First, here is the important Kings Ferry crossing that Livingston is guarding. One could argue that West Point itself exists to guard this crossing, which runs from Stony Point on the west to Verplank on the right. Dobbs Ferry further downriver is not reliably under American control, so Kings Ferry becomes the key American crossing. Washington himself crossed countless times, along with massive movements of American and French troops, communications, food, munitions, etc. And this is Colonel James Livingston's sole charge: to protect Kings Ferry. Here's a view of Kings Ferry that really gives a sense, I think, of why this crossing was so valuable. It's a still from a documentary produced from the New York State Archives called Treason of the Blackest Dye that you can find on YouTube. And from this drone shot that we took, you can really see how close the crossing is. To this point, Livingston's career has been one of dedicated service despite obstacles. He, along with Benedict Arnold, have been explicitly put on high alert by George Washington. Washington has received intelligence, likely from two people to whom I will introduce you in a minute, about the possibility of a British attack on the Highland Post. If you stood today at Croton Point Park, then called Teller's Point, or at Verplanks, you would still have the same clear view of Haverstraw Bay that Livingston and his troops had in September 1780. In addition to the clear visual evidence, with hundreds of troops and militia stationed as sentries on both sides of the river, given the alert, Livingston also has direct contact with the Vulture on this first day of her anchorage. Beverly Robinson, on board the ship, has crafted a ruse for a meeting with Benedict Arnold, and he sends a letter to Arnold under a white flag of truce. The letter asks for a meeting to talk about his, Robinson's, property that Arnold is occupying. As the content of the letter makes clear, Robinson is sending it through the commanding officer at Kings Ferry, that officer being Colonel James Livingston. So the next day, day 3, is September 18th. On this day, Arnold's hope for the cover of a seemingly open and easy meeting is going to be dashed. Robinson's letter arrives while Arnold is meeting with his two aides, Richard Varick and David Frank, along with Artillery Colonel John Lamb. As Varick described in his own court-martial after this event, Arnold read the letter out loud in Varick's word to neutralize any suspicion. A discussion ensues in which the feisty, irascible John Lamb insists that Arnold has absolutely no business meeting about Robinson's property, since it was a civil government, not the military, that seized the property. Lamb's strongly voiced opinion effectively shuts down hope for an open meeting with Robinson. Another interesting thing happens on this day. Benedict Arnold orders 2 9-pound cannons, along with 50 rounds of ammunition and 25 pounds of grape shot, to be taken from West Point downriver to Dobbs Ferry. Artillery Major Sebastian Bowman, stationed at West Point, in response to Arnold's command, orders Artillery Lieutenant Blake to take the cannons on a barge to Dobbs Ferry, where you see the X on the map at the right. Why was Arnold sending these cannons away from West Point? Very likely part of his plan to weaken the defenses at the fort. Blake, however, stops at Stony Point at Kings Ferry. He sends a letter back to Bowman saying that he's uncomfortable proceeding forward since he has seen the Vulture sailing up from Dobbs Ferry, and she's now in the area. So I want you to keep in mind that there are 2 powerful 9-pound cannons now within Livingston's area of control. Moving on to day 4, both Arnold and Livingston will advance their plans. First, Arnold. Although the meeting with Robinson did not happen, Arnold is cleverly using his response, declining the meeting, to transfer important information to the British. On the surface, he is sending a letter to Robinson explaining that he is unable to meet with him because the property discussion is a matter for civil authorities. Arnold's 2 aides are well aware of this letter. Inside that letter, though, there are 2 other sealed letters that his aides have not seen. One tells Robinson that he, Arnold, will be sending a person to Dobbs Ferry, or on board the Vulture on Wednesday, the 20th. So now there is a date of expected contact. And the second letter inside is simply addressed, Dear Sir, but it is clearly meant for John Andre. The letter says, I will send a person in whom you can confide by water. It will be necessary for you to be disguised. This letter is signed Gustavus, one of the names that Andre will recognize Arnold having used in their secret correspondence. Notably, both of these letters are sent through Livingston's command at Verplanck under a white flag of truce to allow them to be safely transmitted to the Vulture. So who is this person that Arnold is sending? We don't have enough time today to do justice to Joshua Het Smith's role in this affair, but he is a fascinating player. Smith is a civilian with whom Arnold has spent a lot of time since taking command of West Point, and Smith is living in his brother's house in Haverstraw. Arnold has sent a pass to allow Smith to move by water quite freely, as shown here. Arnold has now set the table for Smith to bring a British officer of his mensuration, those are Benedict Arnold's words, to meet with Arnold. While Arnold is plotting, Livingston is planning to confront the Vulture. Livingston sends a note to Colonel John Lamb, in charge of artillery at West Point, asking for ammunition for a cannon. Livingston wants to directly attack the ship. On day 5, the situation gets even more interesting. John Lamb does send the ammunition, but along with a bit of attitude. There's a lot of information in this brief letter by Lamb. First, Lamb is sending ammunition for a 4-pound cannon. Why not the 2 more powerful 9-pounders sitting right in Livingston's sector of control? Because when Livingston asked Arnold to use those cannons, Arnold told him no with a frivolous excuse. It must have been excruciatingly frustrating for Livingston to know that 2 powerful cannons were in his grasp but out of his reach. So instead, Livingston is forced to ask for ammunition for a much smaller cannon, the 4-pound cannon, the only one he has, as clearly noted in this letter. Also, note that Lamb is testily telling Livingston that in the future, if you want ammunition, don't ask me. Ask the artillery officer at your post, who I think Rob Haberman is on the call. Rob and I have just been emailing, and through Rob's good work, we think that that is Lieutenant Peter Nestle. Point being that it is clear that Livingston himself appealed to Lamb at West Point for this ammunition. It was that important to him. Finally, it's also clear in this letter that Lamb feels a 4-pound cannon cannot do the job. Lamb calls it a waste of powder when there is little to spare. But fortunately for America, Livingston is going to persist. On the same day that the ammunition arrives to Livingston, so does a very important player in this drama. British Adjutant General John Andre comes upriver, likely on the sloop of war Ranger. As he arrives on board, he hears of the letter that Arnold sent to Robinson saying that a man will arrive for a meeting on September 20th, this very night. So Andre is in high anticipation, but no one arrives. The next morning, day 6, brings a number of dramatic events. This morning, first thing, Andre writes an oddly chatty health update to his commanding officer, Sir Henry Clinton, in New York City. Andre writes that he has caught a cold, and everyone on the Vulture is insisting that he stay on board until he feels better. With this letter, Andre, though, encloses a second sealed letter saying that the cold is just an excuse because no one showed for last night's meeting, and he wants to stay on board another day. So why would Andre need to fabricate this cold? Why could he just not stay on board the British ship since no one from the shore could see that he was there? Well, Andre was the adjutant general to the British commanding officer. If word had gotten out that this high-level officer was hanging out on a ship in Haverstraw Bay, especially after a prior attempt to meet with Arnold earlier in the month, where Andre personally and very publicly journeyed to Dobbs Ferry, Andre was worried that it would begin to raise suspicion that something was up on the Hudson and that that word could leak to the Americans. But why did he think the Americans could find out? Because in July, Arnold had warned the British in one of his coded letters that 2 or 3 men that they thought were in their confidence were actually passing information back to the Americans. This meant that they were double agents. The British thought they were spying for them, but they were actually working for the Americans. At this moment, on day 6 of the story, no British officer, including Andre, knows the identity of these double agents. But they did know that the men were embedded and highly placed. Clinton's willingness to proceed with the attack on West Point was entirely dependent upon the element of surprise. The British could not risk having word of their plan, or even that something was up, to leak out through these unknown agents. So Andre concocted the public excuse of being ill to remain on board, to tamp down any talk, while he hoped that Arnold or someone would contact him. I now know the names of the men that Arnold was referring to. If you attended the Treason of the Blackest Dye exhibit at the Bocantico Center or have heard me speak before, we know that they are Luther Kennicott and Elijah Hunter. These names are on one of the boot papers that Arnold is going to give to Andre the next day, and Arnold intends to blow their cover as double agents. That article that I referred to earlier is the story of how I discovered the role that these 2 men were playing and what Arnold intended to do with them. It's in the New York State Archives magazine. We can talk more about it in the Q&A. But now I'm going to move on from Andre, waiting anxiously on the Vulture, to yet another event that happens on this day, day 6, September 21. At dawn, some men appear on the shore of Teller's Point. They're Americans, and they are waving a white flag of truce. As you've heard, multiple communications have passed this week under flags of truce between the Americans and the British. So the men on the Vulture assume this is another one and send a barge, a rowboat, to pick up the expected message from the Americans. This barge is also herself under a white flag of truce. As the barge approaches the shore, the Americans fire muskets on her. The Vulture's barge returns with no injuries. This event is documented by the master and captain of the Vulture, by James Livingston, by a number of men under Livingston, and will be the subject of a letter of protest sent by Captain Andrew Sutherland to Benedict Arnold about the abuse of the customs of war. John Andre will actually transcribe that letter in his handwriting. So this angry letter is going to be transmitted under yet another flag of truce, but this time Captain Sutherland is going to show caution and send it to the opposite shore at Stony Point. Once again, this letter will be delivered to Benedict Arnold through James Livingston. So let's just spend a minute on what an abuse of flag of truce is. In a nutshell, it's a capital offense. Both sides recognized the strong codependencies involved in respecting flags of truce. Flags were used to convey important information between officers on opposing sides, as you're hearing today, for prisoner exchanges, for exchange of the wounded, to allow women and children safe passage, and other such occurrences. Washington made it clear that a flag was a capital offense, with the penalty of imprisonment for civilians and a court-martial for soldiers. Noted historian Jared Sparks summarized the importance of flags of truce at the time by saying the prostitution of a flag is regarded by all civilized people as one of the basest crimes. No one knows who actually waved the false flag, but there were several men involved in firing the muskets on the rowboat. I will say that this first incident of firing on a boat from the Vulture is likely the source of many of the myths about unsung heroes. One man in particular that Marc will talk about gave a detailed affidavit late in his life saying he had been involved in firing his musket on a rowboat from the Vulture, and he believed that that was the cause of Andre being stranded. And to me, it is understandable that he could have been confused, especially since at that moment, he was not an active soldier and did not have an understanding of the full scope of what was going on during these crucial 7 days. I really don't think anyone did at the time. So the bottom line is, despite the false flag and the musket firing on the British rowboat, no harm had been done to the Vulture, and she will remain at anchor in place, undisturbed, for another 24 hours. So now we are at day 7, September 22nd. This is the day when Colonel James Livingston will take action that prevents Andre from successfully returning to New York City. Just after midnight, on this day, September 22nd, a small rowboat appears alongside the Vulture. In it is Joshua Het Smith, Arnold's civilian accomplice, and it is being rowed by 2 of his tenant farmers, the Cahoon brothers. They are there to bring someone back to meet with Benedict Arnold, who is waiting in a grove of fir trees on the Haverstraw shore, and that man will be John Andre. He will emerge from the ship in a blue cloak covering his red uniform and using the name John Anderson. Anderson climbs into the boat and men row him to the shore where he meets with Arnold for some time. The image in the center of this slide is a sketch by Andre of that event that he did while he was awaiting execution in Japan. When Andre is ready to be rowed back to the Vulture with Arnold's detailed instructions, the Cahoon brothers refuse. They are stubborn Dutchmen, they are tired, and they will not row against the tide, no matter how colorful Arnold's language becomes. So Arnold and, quote, John Anderson ride to Smith's house in Haverstraw to allow the Cahoons to rest up. As day is breaking, everyone in the house hears a loud sound coming from across the river. Colonel James Livingston has ordered the cannonade to begin. The story is that Andre watched the ship sail downriver in response to this cannonade from the second-story window in the house. The beleaguered ship is now too far for even the rested Cahoons to row, and they are no dummies. They have no intention of going out on the river with cannonballs flying. The fact that Livingston ordered this cannonade and the men under his command executed it is well documented. Here's one example from the pension file of Benjamin Miller, who describes that on Livingston's orders, he worked with 50 men overnight, dragging a 4-pound cannon and possibly 2 howitzers from the Verplank blockhouse to Teller's Point, today's Croton Point Park. Miller says they spent all night throwing up a kind of breastwork to protect themselves, and they commenced firing at dawn. This coincides with the records of the captain and the master of the Vulture, Livingston, and many other witnesses. Here's another drone shot from that same documentary showing approximately the view Andre would have had of the firing on the Vulture from Smith's house. Because the ship is now out of reach and there is extreme time urgency to start the attack, Arnold convinces Andre to travel overland through Westchester County. Arnold writes passes for Andre, Smith, and a man enslaved by Smith for this journey. The party of 3 cross over King's Ferry at dusk this day, September 22nd. The next morning, September 23rd, Andre starts out alone before dawn, crosses Pines Bridge, and proceeds down to Tarrytown, where 3 militiamen are waiting. The game is up for Andre. Had he gotten through to New York City, Admiral Rodney and the British would have launched the attack, surprising the Americans and, with Arnold's assistance, likely taking the fort. So it is Livingston's cannonade that thwarts Arnold's plan, costs Andre his life, and prevents the British from taking the Hudson. So I promised you a week, but I'm going to give you quickly one bonus day, Monday, September 25th. Ever since he left Andre at Smith's house on September 22nd, Arnold has been anxiously awaiting some sign that the attack is beginning. He has no idea what happened to Andre until another series of dramatic events, too long to talk about in today's presentation, results in Arnold learning of Andre's capture. Arnold has hours, if not minutes, to spare before Washington's aides will read a letter addressed to Washington with the same information. Arnold knows that he is not going to be able to explain his way out of this. He runs out of the Robinson house, telling everyone that he is on his way to West Point to prepare it for the arrival of the commander-in-chief. He rides at breakneck speed down a dangerous ravine to his waiting barge. Instead of telling the bargemen to row him across to West Point, he tells them to row south as fast as they can. He doesn't really know what he's going to do. He just keeps pushing the men to row fast. Countless pension documents from men under Livingston's command say that they saw Arnold pass in his barge holding a white flag of truce. Of course, the soldiers, who did not know what was happening, would not shoot at him no matter what, because he was protected by that white flag. And then, as tersely recorded in the log of Captain Sutherland of the Vulture, quote, at 11:30, General Arnold in the American service delivered himself up with the boat's crew, end quote. But wait, there is one more letter, one last flag of truce in this dramatic week. Immediately after Arnold boards the Vulture, he writes a letter to Washington that he gives to the coxswain of his barge to take back to Livingston at King's Ferry. The letter states that his wife Margaret, his 2 aides, and Joshua Hat Smith are innocent and know nothing of his plan. And then he asks Washington to pack up his clothing and send them to him in New York City. And we can talk about why he would do that in the Q&A if you want. So I want to end here, hoping that the sequenced primary source evidence I've analyzed and shared with you today has returned honor to American Colonel James Livingston for foiling Arnold's plan. Against the odds and against the sabotage of his commanding officer, Livingston's actions stranded Andre, prevented what would likely have been British control of the Hudson and a different outcome of the war. The details of this dramatic week, with links to all the primary sources, will be published in a few weeks in the Westchester Historian, as Sarah said. I encourage you to join the Westchester County Historical Society, and you will get your very own copy of the article. But also RW250 has permission to post it on our website, and we'll be sharing that information with Sarah to share with you. So thank you for your attention to this new research, and I'm proud to be able to turn this over to my colleague and friend, Marc Cheshire, to talk a little bit more about untangling the myths that developed about this dramatic event.
Okay. All right. Let's see if I can do this. Hold on just a second. All right, can everyone see that? Char, can you see that? Okay,
Yep.
Great. All right, so this, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for having me today. This is the monument to Moses Sherwood and John Peterson on the western shore of Croton Point Park. It was placed there in 1967 by the Mohegan, Pierre Van Cortlandt, Tarrytown chapters of the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's one of 2 DAR monuments in the park, and both are historically inaccurate. The plaque reads, whoops, hold on. Sorry. Oh, this was working before. Hold on just a second. I'm trying to advance. All right, let me just do it this way. Can everyone see this?
Marc, we're seeing instructions, not the slides.
Oh, you saw? Oh, goodness. Hold on. We had this working before. All right, let me take this from the beginning. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So this, so again, as I said, this is the monument on Croton Point that was placed by the DAR. one of two monuments on Croton Point that are historically inaccurate. The plaque reads, "Commemorating the defense of Teller's Point by George Sherwood and Jack Peterson, who repulsed the landing of the British troops from the Vulture, September 21, 1780, thus aiding in the capture of Major Andre." The first error is Sherwood's name, which was Moses, not George. This is a clue that the DAR chapter relied on Robert Bolton's History of Westchester County, published in 1848, for their information, because he also refers incorrectly to Sherwood as George. Jack Peterson is one of several names Peterson was known by. Peterson's actual surname was Patterson, but he is known to history as John Peterson, Jack Peterson, and Rifle Jack Peterson. The actions of the two men had no role in the capture of Major Andre, and their actions to repulse the landing of British troops from the Vulture was not heroic, but a violation of the protocols of war. The story of how Sherwood and Peterson became associated with the events Char just described begins in Albany on March 7, 1833, when a paper entitled "Recollections of the Revolution" was read at the Albany Institute by Robert E. Ward, which purports to reveal previously untold facts relating to, quote, "an event of no less magnitude than the capture of Major Andre." Ward's paper was republished widely in New York state newspapers and elsewhere. By May 1833, the story had been published in a newspaper as far away as Richmond, Virginia. Ward acknowledges the role of Andre's capture, but then reveals the strong possibility that had not the facts occurred which I am about to mention, the capture would have never taken place, because he, Andre, would never have been in a situation to be captured. The story he tells is dramatic and full of invented dialogue. It takes place on Teller's Point, today Croton Point Park, where a farmer is making cider, quote, "in the autumn of the year 1780. While busily employed in the manufacture of his cider," Ward writes, "two young men, whose names were Sherwood and Peterson, with their muskets, approached the farmer, and after passing the usual salutations and refreshing themselves with the new-made cider, seated themselves on a log that lay near the mill." This is a map made by the French troops in 1782 that shows an orchard on Teller's Point. This is the Van Cortlandt Manor House at the mouth of the Croton River, with Teller's Point jutting out into the Hudson. Croton Ferry, which you see in the lower right, refers to the ferry which travelers on the Albany Post Road used to cross the river next to the manor. And next to the manor house, you can see all that series of dots was a large orchard. There is a similar orchard on Teller's Point. This is the approximate location of the Sherwood and Peterson monument that I showed earlier today. So back to Ward's story. The farmer, observing them in close conversation and looking intently upon some distant object, asked to acquaint him with the cause of their alarm and anxiety. "Hush, speaking low," says Sherwood, "the redcoats are about us." "Where?" asks the farmer in a whisper. "Yonder, yonder," answers Peterson, pointing at the same spot where an English gunboat with 24 men lay upon their oars. "Return to your mill," he added, and addressing himself to Sherwood, "we will crawl back to the bank of the river and give the red boys a shot." Peterson and Sherwood drew near the margin of the shore and placed themselves behind a large rock, which was directly between them and the gunboat. Here, after reconnoitering the situation of the gunboat and examining their guns, they fired upon the crew and killed 2 persons. As we now know from Char's primary source research, Ward's story so far is inaccurate in several key points. There's no mention of the waving of a white flag to lure the small boat from the Vulture to the shore, and then firing upon the boat that they had lured under false pretenses. And the shots fired by Sherwood and Peterson did not kill 2 British sailors. As Ward's story continues, it deviates so far from the known facts about the Arnold and Andre affair that it calls into question everything he writes. We know that the false flag firing took place on September 21, and that the cannonade on the Vulture took place early the following morning, leading to Andre's furtive journey from Haverstraw through the dangerous neutral ground in Westchester. Yet Ward describes the following incident as taking place soon after Sherwood and Peterson fired on the boat from the Vulture, roughly 24 hours before Andre actually left Haverstraw. While Sherwood and Peterson were informing the farmer as the results of the skirmish, Ward writes, a man was observed coming down the east bank of the river below Colleburg Landing, which is today Croton on Hudson, and cautiously examining everything around him. The stranger had gained the spot nearly opposite where the gunboat had been stationed before he observed the men at the mill. Just to show how ridiculous this is, this arrow shows the distance between the orchard and the post road at that time. It's a huge distance. There's no way they could have possibly seen anyone on that road. Ward continues, upon discovering them, he retraces his steps a few rods and then took an easterly course through the fields toward the Croton River. That man was no less a personage than Major Andre, bearing upon him the trader's dispatches to the British general. The gunboat was to have received him at the point where it had been stationed and conveyed him safely on board the Vulture. This is wholly inaccurate. Andre departed Haverstraw the following day. He was on horseback, accompanied by Joshua Het Smith and the man enslaved by Smith, and he never traveled down the shore of the Hudson River toward Teller's Point. Ward ends by saying that West Point, the Gibraltar of New York, owes its safety not to the captors of the spy, but to those who were instrumental in putting him in the way of being captured. While, therefore, we award the proper meed of praise to William, Paulding, and Van Wart, and erect monuments to their memory for the agency they had in the capture, let us not forget the part enacted by Sherwood and Peterson and the agency they had in enabling the capture to take place. Robert Ward's story and responses to it were published in books, magazines, and newspapers in the ensuing decades. 3 years after its original publication, the story was reprinted in Freeman Hunt's book, Letters About the Hudson River, where he refers to it as a traditionary circumstance. This prompted a response from Pierre Van Cortlandt Jr., son of General Pierre Van Cortlandt, who had commanded the 3rd Westchester Militia Regiment. In 1839, Pierre Van Cortlandt Jr. sent a letter that was also read before the Albany Institute, giving his, quote, recollections concerning the capture of Andre and the route taken by that officer. Likely a belated response to Ward's story in Hunt's book, Van Cortlandt wrote that, quote, the agency of certain persons named Sherwood and Peterson, as asserted in a series of Letters About the Hudson, is altogether fabulous. When Van Cortlandt's letter was published locally in Sing Sing, today Ossining, the paper ran an editorial. Many of our readers will remember that on the occasion of the celebration of the last anniversary of American independence at this place, one of the speakers attributed the arrest of Andre mainly to the agency of 2 men named Sherwood and Peterson. At the time, it struck us as somewhat a singular statement, as so important an item should certainly have been incorporated into the history of that important event. The same story found its way into Letters About the Hudson, and the following, meaning Van Cortlandt's letter, which they published in that issue, it will be seen that the whole Sherwood and Peterson story is but another of those fabulous tales growing out of an imperfect knowledge of the passing events of the times. In 1836, a magazine published a very different account of the events on Teller's Point, told to the author by Jeremiah Steeves, who said he was present with Sherwood and Peterson that day. The account had been submitted, also to the Albany Institute, by B.P. Johnson of Rome, New York, in response to Ward's story. According to Johnson, Esquire Steeves is well acquainted with Sherwood and Peterson. They were boys together and brought up within 2 miles of each other. Steeves claimed he was with Sherwood and Peterson that day. He makes no mention of the false flag, but says that soon after firing on the boat from the Vulture, they were fired upon by a group of soldiers from the Vulture, who were already on shore gathering apples from the orchard. Steeves claims the 3 men were soon joined by other men that he knew to be friends. and a gun battle ensued between the Patriots and the British that went on until sunset. How the story came to be circulated and so far from fact is strange to him, and that Sherwood and Peterson's name should be inserted and not his, Steve's, is still. It is not a fact that they placed themselves behind a rock when they first fired at the British, nor was the boat laying on her oars, nor did she immediately return to the sloop, nor our people to the mill and conversing with the farmer as stated. Steve's claims that he, Sherwood, and Peterson stayed on Teller's Point until Captain Nessel of the artillery from Verplank's Point came down and joined them there and sent back some men and brought down a field piece, a brass 4-pounder and a small mortar, with ammunition for them. And the 3 boys went with him to pilot him to the end of the point, where the ship lay at night, and there in silence made a small trench for the pieces and men, and at daybreak, at the turn of the tide, began to play upon the ship. And the 3 boys, Steves, Sherwood, and Peterson, then placed themselves behind a rock and saw the hull fracas and the shells flying with their streams of fire. There was great confusion aboard the ship, and it slipped its cable and set up sail. But there was a dead calm, and they could not get out of the way of our shot until all the ammunition was exhausted. Every shot hit her. The fire was not returned for some time, but when they began to move, they rattled it off in earnest. Steve's account appears to be a mixture of fable and facts. He was 75 years old at the time he spoke to Johnson and would die 3 years later. His knowledge of the ordnance brought down from the fort at Verplank and the location of the Vulture at the end of the point suggest that he was there. Throughout the 19th century, variations of the Sherwood-Peterson story continue to be published, though author and publisher William Abbott, in his book, The Crisis of the Revolution, The Story of Arnold and Andre, called the story a mass of traditionary and legendary romance. When veterans of the Revolutionary War were able to apply for pensions in 1818, both Sherwood and Peterson went through the complicated process of gathering affidavits and records. But neither men's files in the National Archives mention their involvement in the Teller's Point event. From 1844 to 1851, when lawyer turned historian John MacDonald conducted his interviews with Westchester residents who had lived during the Revolutionary War, he spoke to Peterson 3 times. Sherwood had died in 1837 and was never interviewed. In his interviews, Peterson recounts a skirmish in Westchester known as Moyser's Fight, which took place on December 2, 1781. He also recalls that General Philip Van Cortlandt helped him secure a pension. But notably, he doesn't mention the events on Teller's Point. One primary source document that does discuss Sherwood and Peterson's role in firing on the Vulture is the transcript of an 1837 probate hearing over the will of Moses Sherwood. At issue in the case was Sherwood's state of mind when he made his will. He had died on February 17, 1837. In his pension application, there are 3 letters dated 1836 from his attorney, Aaron Ward, stating that Sherwood was then, quote, insane. Peterson was called as a witness because he had visited Sherwood months before his death. According to Peterson, who was then 90 years old, it was the first time they had seen each other since the event on Teller's Point. During his testimony, Peterson admitted that he could neither read nor write, and that his memory was sometimes hazy. He stated that the purpose of his visit was, quote, to get a witness from him, meaning Sherwood, about the firing upon the barge. Later in his testimony, he says, quote, I meant to apply to the government to get a little more for that service driving off the barge. I'd done it for the good of my country. Although he testified that Sherwood supported his versions of the events on Teller's Point, when asked what was the condition of his speech, could he talk plain, Sherwood admitted, quote, oh, no, sir, you could hardly understand him. Peterson did not get an affidavit from Sherwood, and there is nothing in Peterson's pension records indicating that he submitted a request for additional pension money based on the incident. Sherwood is buried in Sparta Cemetery in Ossining. On the left is his grave, and on the right is a stone and a flag, since he's a veteran, that's kind of hidden by the grave in the picture on the left. Peterson is buried at Bethel Cemetery in Croton on Hudson. He's the only known Revolutionary War soldier buried in Bethel Cemetery. Both men deserve to be honored for their military service during the Revolutionary War, but not for their involvement in the false flag incident, which had no impact on the events that led to the successful cannonade on the Vulture the following day. And with that, I think maybe we'll take questions. Let me. Okay. Try to get out of this.
Char and Marc, that was fantastic. I felt like I was in a movie, a better version than Netflix seems to be able to do of the historical past in our area. So thank you for that. Really twists and turns throughout. We have a few questions. One was a clarification. Was Livingston under direct command of Arnold?
Yes, on August 3rd, 1780, in Peekskill, George Washington signed the papers making Benedict Arnold the commander of the Hudson Highlands. So it was West Point, but it was also the environs, including Kings Ferry, that were were being guarded by Benedict Arnold. So it's pretty amazing to me, but not surprising given the magnitude of Arnold's treason, that what he was doing to undermine what Livingston, his direct report, was doing at Kings Ferry, Stony Point, and Verplank's Point.
Wonderful. So a couple of related questions that maybe both of you can answer. You use many primary sources. Do you believe middle school and high school students can and should be asked to analyze primary sources?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are people on this call who were kind enough to help me with the field trips that we did at the Treason of the Blackest Dye exhibit at the Botanico Center. And I would extend that to say we had fourth graders who were using exclusively primary sources there to learn about the Arnold's treason, about the boot papers, about the capture of Andre. So having taught history, American studies for many, many years, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's essential that we expose students to primary sources early in their career as students, and even lower school is not too soon.
Excellent. And Marc?
I agree. I agree, absolutely. I went with Char with some of the classes, and I agree wholeheartedly. And we need to make sure that they don't rely completely on Wikipedia and other secondary sources, which are often wrong in many areas.
Yeah, I feel like there's such an opportunity, especially in our region, for students. I'm pleased to hear the term American Studies. That's what I studied when I was in school, so I'm glad to hear the term alive and well. And related to that, with your primary work and uncovering of new details, how have you been able to observe these details, just enter into the revision of the storytelling? I mean, you mentioned that Netflix gets it wrong, but how do these new details get out there into textbooks and courses and everything?
We need to publish them, which they will soon be. And once they're published by the Westchester County Historical Society in the magazine, then we're going to post them on the Revolutionary Westchester 250 website.
Yeah, I think publish them I completely agree with you, Marc, and also, share them. So, so I love Rick Atkinson. When his first book came out, though, I saw that his depiction of the turtle and what happened to the turtle was based upon general knowledge, and it's something I'm going to publish. So I've sent him the primary sources. He did a great job of acknowledging he did not know what had actually happened to the turtle. And, should he republish that again, he will correct it. So I have been in touch with him to say, when you do your third book, get the story of the capture right. And he's been extremely receptive about that. He really does want to get it right. I will tell you, I'm eager to see what Ken Burns says. I hope that he gets the story right, because there has been so much ink and videos given to the wrong story about what happened in terms of everything we've talked about today. So I'm really eager to see how Ken Burns handles it. I did reach out to him, but I got a thank you for your interest kind of response.
Oh, yeah, it's an effort to get it out there. A couple more questions. We talked about some of the people who have commemorative stones and et cetera out and about. Were the three soldiers who captured Major Andre honored for this?
Yes, they were honored.
This
It
one.
was a very, very low point in the war. Our money was very devalued through counterfeiting and the lack of the ability to back it in gold and silver. That was one of the things actually the French brought, but Washington was literally just meeting with Rochambeau in Hartford while he was coming back to Arnold's house. So the money was a significant problem. You could tell from Lamb's letters that we were really struggling to get ammunition. Many of the people who lived where we are today in Westchester were finding that the American forage parties coming through were dismantling their windows to take the lead weights and the lead holding the window panes in place because they were out of musket balls. So my point here is that it was a very, very low point in the war. And so Congress and New York State were thrilled to be able to take three men who were in the right place at the right time and did the right thing and hold them up. So they received pensions during the war. So as Marc said, there was some pensions given during the war, but the first real act was 1818 to award veterans pensions. So they received $200 a year for life. They received these incredible silver medals, the three of them that were awarded directly by Washington. We had one of the only original that's not stolen is Isaac Van Wart's that is today in the New York State Museum. We had that at the exhibit. And New York State gave them an allowance that allowed them each to have secure a farm from a loyalist family that had been attainted from a loyalist family. So I think it was very, very prominent, the rewards that they received, because the message was, we might not be paying your salary and things might look dark, but if you do the right thing, your country is going to reward you for it.
So not just rewarded, but a motivator for others.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I hope many like myself were able to go to the Blackest Eye exhibit. That was fantastic. I went with a descendant of the Demarest, so it felt a little bit like a celebrity to be present as their family was involved.
Oh, I love the Demarest. I probably talked to you there about that. I'm a big fan of the whole.
That might have been that.
Yeah.
Two last questions. One or three, and we'll end it there. Given primary sources are sometimes contradictory, how do you determine the truth?
Well, I will say, and I'll be interested in Marc's comment on this, but we do have to look at them carefully and triangulate, right? Because two important sources, the McDonald papers and the pension documents, are from original people who were involved, but much later in life. And so sometimes both of those really important primary sources have a little bit of the stories we tell ourselves that work into them. So it's always kind of verification through other sources. And then sometimes you're still left with gaps, and you can fill in with analysis and you correct yourself if new information is going to come out after that. Marc, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, it's the same, and you weigh different primary sources differently. I mean, the logs from the Vulture were recorded at the time for military purposes, part of huge documents that recorded where they recorded everything. So if those documents don't say anything about two soldiers being killed when they were attacked in a false flag event, you can rely upon the fact that they probably that probably is true, because otherwise they would have reported, and it would have, so you have to triangulate.
Yeah, and that's a good pivot. If you got all the way to the end of the document about the Vulture, a question is, what was the ultimate fate of the Vulture?
Oh, so she actually went up to, she was moving around a lot, as many of these ships were. Early in the war, you probably heard about the Phoenix and the Rose going up the Hudson, but these ships were moving between Canada and between the Caribbean. But at the very end of the war, evacuation day time frame, she was one of the ships that carried the Loyalists. In her case, she went over to England. And I will tell you, if you think you're seeing a picture of the Vulture, because there was another British ship, the HMS. HMS was not used for a designation for ships until the end of the war. There was a steamship called the Vulture. And so I'll see images of that out there. But if you see the steam, thing that, whatever it is, that steam chimney on it, it's the wrong boat. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. It's such a wonderful presentation. We're so appreciative, and now I'm going to go get my subscription to the Westchester Historian so I can see your story when it comes out. So we really appreciate your time, Veronica. I'm going to give you a moment to turn on your camera and mic, and just mention one thing, which is if you're in Westchester County and basically probably anywhere, you have the opportunity to vote early. So get out there if you're a registered voter. We appreciate the support of the Historical Society gets from the county and from the village. So please do your part civically and get out there. And then one of our, we do have a question that I guess maybe is for Veronica or Sarah, that is the Treason of the Blackest Die exhibit coming to our Historical Society in 2026?
Yes, I believe it is. I got word from Pat Ryan, who basically is in charge of our exhibits, that this is the next one that's coming up after we conclude the exhibit on the Irvington Gazette. So I don't have any dates on it, but we will keep our audience posted via our email distribution list.
And I present Veronica Gedrick, our president, and with a few final comments.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Char and Marc, for a wonderful and scholarly presentation. Thank you all for joining us today. And please stay tuned just for a few minutes while I tell you what's coming up in our calendar. Our legacy exhibit will be on display in the Martucci Gallery at the Irvington Library until the end of the month. Please drop in and see the portraits of 10 longtime Irvington residents and their memories of the village years ago. Our annual gala will be held at the Ardsley Country Club on Sunday, November 9th, from noon to 4 p.m. We will be celebrating those same Irvington residents whose stories will be featured in a documentary film premiering at that event. Guests will also enjoy delicious brunch and live music in a beautiful setting. So we hope you'll be there to celebrate with us, and tickets are available on our website, irvingtonhistoricalsociety.org. On Sunday, November 23rd at 2 p.m., Chet Kerr will present an engaging Zoom program on map digitization, a project he's devoted extensive time and research to. His work has become an invaluable resource for the Society and the community. This is a virtual event, so please don't forget to register on our website to receive the Zoom link. Our annual meeting will be held on Friday, December 5th at 7 p.m. at the Main Street School. We're pleased to welcome Andrew Lipman, professor at Barnard College, as our guest speaker. His talk, Squanto Native Odyssey, explores the remarkable journey of Squanto, who was enslaved taken to Europe, and ultimately returned to his homeland, forever shaping early American history. This in-person event does not require registration, and we welcome all to attend. And finally, we'll be joining in the community celebration at the Main Street holiday happening on Saturday, December 6th. Be sure to stop by the McVicker House at 131 Main Street to browse our stock of unique sale items. You may find the perfect gift for somebody on your list. Hope to see you all at the gala on November 9th, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Char and Marc.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.